everybody. Thanks a lot for joining another episode of the Fintech Hustle. I'm Ron Shevlin, Director of Research at Cornerstone Advisors, and my co-host, of course, is Sam Kilmer, Senior Director here and leader of the Fintech Advisory Practice at Cornerstone. Welcome to another episode of the Fintech Hustle. We have two really great guests today that I want to introduce. The first is Allison Netzer, the Chief Marketing and Strategy Officer. I had to think which one went first on that one. It probably doesn't matter because she does both pieces very well. And I'm sure many of you know who Allison is. She is an industry veteran, has done some stints at Total Expert, of course, was SVP, EVP, Chief Marketing Officer, whatever the title was at Coney, and then over at Temenos after being acquired. And I would be remiss not to mention that Allison is a fellow Forbes contributor, a great piece that she came out with just a few days ago on how Gen Zers and millennials can reinvent or impact the banking industry. So please check that out on Forbes. And our other guest is Scott Happ, who is the president of the Secondary Marketing Technologies for Black Knight. Scott was CEO, I think founder or co-founder of Optimal Blue, which has been acquired now by Black Knight. And Scott, too, is a veteran entrepreneur in the fintech space. He was co-founder or founder and CEO of MortgageBot. So Allison, Scott, thanks a lot for joining us. Sam, as always, appreciate you, your leadership of this. And I'll get things kicked off here because we typically we always ask our guests, what's working, not working in the industry. And we'll get to that a little bit later on. But, one of the things that I think is kind of top of mind for a lot of people this week with some of the news of a recent big acquisition in the fintech space. And we don't want to talk specifically about that acquisition, but about the trend of mergers and acquisitions in the financial technology space. A lot going on there. And Allison, you've been actually part of a couple now, I think. Yeah. I want to ask you about the most recent deal in particular, but from a trend perspective, what do you think is kind of going on from a mergers and acquisitions perspective? And where do you see things going over the next couple of years?
Sure. Well, financial services or the people in FinServ, I think, are naturally acquisitive and inquisitive. So I think some of the trend just has to do with the people leading these companies. I think we immediately sort of go to what are the tech trends driving acquisition, but I think it's actually interesting to look at some of the leadership, especially as you see more folks with true banking credit union backgrounds moving into fintech and vice versa, just naturally acquisitive personalities. There's also the desire for data, right? Even acquisitions that we don't put in that this is a data acquisition bucket are underneath, I think, in a sense, about data, whether we realize it or not going in. So I think that's the second. And then the third is really the consumer demand, right? In FinServ, we push each other a lot. There's positives and negatives to that, but the consumer themselves, they're voting for this type of trend, right? With their downloads and with their dollars, right? So it's pushing us, which I think is the right dynamic, quite frankly.
Okay, but a lot of this doesn't necessarily touch the consumer, but from a customer perspective, a lot of the clients are financial institutions. I'm not convinced that they're always so keen on some of these acquisitions. How do you take into account the impact that it has on a lot of the financial institutions as clients?
Sure. I mean, I think it introduces churn into the equation, which is kind of where I think you were going, with that. And it's never as simple as, buying technology or buying innovation. You could argue you can't buy innovation. You can buy technology that then innovates, right? And has to be part and parcel of the bank and the credit union. So, I think you make a fair point. It's as you're being acquired or being the acquirer, it's not always a joyful experience, but I think it can be once the technology changes hands and you really look at the culture, the processes, et cetera, that it's going to go into and support. And that is where I think there starts to become some consumer benefit in that regard.
So you haven't been through this, Allison. If you were advising, the acquirer of another company in the space, what would you tell them to go tell the clients and prospects of the acquired company?
Yeah, that's a good question. And the answer is not, it's going to be business as usual. Sam has advised me on that in many dinners over the years, because why would you be doing it if it's going to be business as usual? That actually doesn't make any sense. You want to reassure as much as you know you will have the power and the autonomy to reassure. But part of it is just leaning into, especially if you're a fintech, your early customers decided to go on the adventure with you, and you might not have had everything figured out. So rather than saying, Ron, it's business as usual, it's, Ron, this is our next adventure together. We're taking this leap together, and I'm not going to let you down, right? I'm going to break rocks for you, just like I did for you when you purchased software before anybody else did. So I think kind of leaning into the new adventure, new chapter, not it's going to be more of the same, nothing is going to change, is what I would advise.
Yeah, so that's interesting. You kind of turned my question around a little bit.
I did a little bit, yeah.
Which was good. But you're saying that it's really the acquired company that needs to go reach out to their client base.
Absolutely.
Versus the acquirers saying, okay, we're here now and taking over, but don't worry, everything's going to be fine, because nobody's really buying that.
No. And Ron, if I could just for future best practice for future Fintech Hustle sessions is when a guest turns a question back on us. I think that's
you know I was going to do that. Yeah.
Check mark. Good job, Allison. That's the way that works.
Yeah, this is see how many times you can twist Ron's questions around on them and pin it back. It's a good game to kind of play. Scott, what's your take? You've actually been through this yourself a couple of times with MortgageBot and Optimal Blue. What do you see as kind of the trend in the space? And, Allison mentioned data, and of course, that's very applicable to what you've been doing. So what's your take on the trends and where you think things are going in the next couple of years?
I think there's a few different forces. There's been some big transactions in the, my kind of segment of the fintech world, the mortgage tech piece. There's a few big forces. I think if you look at the ICE transaction with Ellie, ICE is famous for electronifying marketplaces, bringing more analog processes to a digital environment, very strong in the data skill area. And I think that's what drove that transaction, was their belief that they could help further electronify the mortgage process. In the case of OB sale to Black Knight, I think, in that case, you have a player that's really trying to bring an end, kind of a really true end-to-end capability to the market in the mortgage segment. So it's a bit of a different driver, electronification, data being the ICE driver. I think Black Knight's more trying to do some work around bringing a fully, from the listing all the way to the, to the recapture of the loan, 10 years into the servicing. And so I think we got bit different drivers. In the first M&A transaction I was involved in, when we sold mortgage to a Canadian firm, and in that case, they just wanted to plant their flag in the U.S. And so that was a bit of a different drive. I do think, on the like what changes part of the discussion, I ideally, and I think you see it both in the ICE deal and in the Black Knight deal with Optimal Blue, there are integration opportunities in both those transactions. The companies owned mortgage tech assets, and there's opportunities to plug together those assets with the newly acquired businesses and actually create value for customers. So there's a nice narrative in both cases. You need that, right? Because customers get anxious and they want to be reassured that there's some benefit in here for them. And I think in both cases, there is.
Yes, Scott, when I kind of try to look at the broad history of acquisitions in the space, it seems to have kind of gone from, really large companies like the big cores like FIS and Fiserv and so forth, acquiring, expanding their application set, expanding from sort of a capability perspective and applications. more now towards things where, different, it's not sort of expansion, but, moving into new businesses. Obviously they, acquired and merged with some, really big players in the merchant payment space. And now it seems that maybe more of the merger is from acquiring innovation type capabilities. Do you see the nature of the acquisitions shifting over time, and where do we go from here?
I think if there's a consistent theme over the long haul, and it ebbs and flows a bit, but innovators, typically people who are doing startups, the way Allison's team has and my team has, oftentimes coming out of the industry, developing an innovation. Sometimes you see sort of surges in the number of firms that are innovating, like we saw, I think, in the mortgage space 5 or 6 years ago. And then, other times you see less activity. I mean, as to kind of drive that point home, I was involved in this mortgage bot firm, which was a point of sale provider, and we sold it in 2012. And there were maybe 2 providers at that time in that space. And I left the business for a while and took some time off, came back in 4 years later. There were, I think, 13 point of sale providers 4 years later, an absolute explosion in innovation and activity. So it does ebb and flow. Ultimately there'll probably be some consolidation and some shakeup, but this has been going on in the tech world, from the beginning, and I don't see it slowing down. In fact, it's the barrier to entry is lower, right? You don't need to even buy a server these days. You don't even need an office. You just need a good idea, some hardworking people who know how to code, maybe a credit union or a bank or mortgage lender sponsor you, and you're off and running. So the barriers to entry are lower than ever. I just think we're going to see more innovation than we've ever seen before. Again, it'll ebb and flow.
But, a couple things.
Wait, Sam, before you get into that, I'm going to get you in a second, but I just want to comment on something that Scott said, because he just basically exposed my whole business plan here. I've launched something called SOAP. It's called Shevlin's Online Accounting Program. I don't have any employees. I don't have any code. I don't have anything. But I do have a
big
name.
valuation, though. Right?
So if anybody wants to acquire my company now to get in early, please send me the offers now. I think it's pretty. It's called SOAP. Sam, so let me get to you, Sam. I didn't mean to cut you off, but
I know
you're a fervent watcher of this space. So what's your kind of take on what's going on?
Well, for starters, I would say your valuation is currently 45 times revenue. The bad news being that you don't have any revenue. So I think that's your valuation. But as I was thinking about this, the one connective piece here is that, Allison, I know at NYMBUS, you guys have account origination as part of your suite, both with MortgageBot, Scott, and also with Black Knight. Obviously, origination was a theme. I think one of the interesting things is I was even at one of the large core provider conferences a couple of years ago, and how even then origination and helping a bank grow, like actually not run the bank transactions and servicing, but actually grow the bank, was not really seen as an area that was even really expected of a large enterprise provider. It was more about kind of almost enabling the running of the shop, not the growing of the shop. And it seems like it's interesting in so many of these acquisitions. And Ron, you mentioned maybe not getting into some of the names, but heck, I'll name some names that were out there. I mean, we saw the Terrafina, NCR's acquisition of Terrafina, and I think you can follow a whole line of them. Meridian Link acquired a couple of different providers, Carif, and then they acquired more recently TCI, FIS, Zenmonics. They have some origination capabilities. One connective thing I've seen that's kind of interesting is just the understanding of the sales process in bringing a client or customer member in credit union land into the fold, as opposed to just processing them once they're in. I think it's kind of interesting too that deposit origination continues to be kind of hot, even though we've just had a year where people had plenty of deposits. It's not like we need a lot of deposits, but it's like the payments relationship. Well, we used to talk about, Ron, back when I was a banker, which when I had hair, and that wasn't recently, was that the idea of the primary financial institution associated with the payments account, the checking account relationship, now the debit card and credit card. It just seems like bringing on board commercial relationships, mortgage relationships, cross-selling the deposit and getting the cash management in businesses is as hot as ever. And you guys talked about data-related things, and whether it was Optimal Blue, Scott. I think it was interesting. One of the things that you mentioned about MortgageBot was that when MortgageBot was doing, and I remember this because at the last firm I was at, Harlan Financial Solutions, we had a partnership with MortgageBot. And you're right, you were one of just a couple of people that were doing what MortgageBot was doing. Then I thought it was interesting that when you became CEO of Optimal Blue and you and the team kind of joined up there, I couldn't name at the time more than 2 or 3 or 4 firms at that time that were doing pricing specific data analysis. And in the mortgage realm, I could probably only name 2, maybe. So I think it's kind of interesting that these entrepreneurs, whether the system has been there for a while in the industry, or you've launched it out of kind of whole cloth and sheer force of nature and will, you're one of only a couple of players, and it's good to be one of only a couple of players in space.
Yeah. There's one other kind of interesting thing on the acquisition side. Ties into data, and maybe you see this I think sometimes we see this on the kind of the core banking side as well. But some of these businesses, they're data businesses, they're SaaS businesses, but when you peel away the layers of the onion, you realize that they're network. And those network businesses are the businesses that are so powerful and where you oftentimes get a very, very dominant player because of the effect, the network effects that occur. So Verafin, of course, we saw that the NASDAQ acquisition of Verafin for an incredible valuation, and that's a data business. It's a SaaS business, but based on their model, the more clients they have, the more valuable that data is, and the same is true. Ellie's a network and OB is a network. So yes, we have data, we're a SaaS platform, but it's that network effect that really makes some of these business models particularly powerful and valuable, and why you end up with so few players, because that network effect can propel you to a very strong dominant place. So those are few and far between, those businesses, but they're quite interesting and quite good to be involved
in. Yeah, I think it's a good point you make about the network effect. I think many of you may have also seen in the last, 3 or 4 months that Promontory rebranded as Entrify. They were the people that had the kind of the Cedars, and just trying to expand the value of that network. And one of the great things about Optimal Blue, right, was just that it had so many institutions on it. Verafin, so many institutions on it already. Even MortgageBot, Scott, when I think back on that and think when you were able to do kind of like peer-to-peer studies, right? Because you had all that sitting
in the benchmarking, right? All that benchmarking, becomes so you blend together a SaaS business, so you have you have visibility into the data. Of course, you anonymize it, aggregate it, but the more clients you have, the more meaningful those benchmark measures, those market share measures, those productivity measures become. And they're again, that network. It really is quite an important underlying factor in some of the valuations and some of the market positions that we're seeing in certain segments of fintech.
Very interesting. Well, maybe let's jump in, Ron. We'll jump into another topic. So I think we've kind of kicked around the acquisition can a little bit. Maybe let's jump into another topic. Just something that we saw recently in the news was Walmart announcing that they were getting into a partnership with Ribbit Capital, Ribbit Capital founders associated with Robinhood, as well as a firm, I believe, looking back over that. And so Walmart wasn't real specific about what they're planning to do, other than just, we want to get into fintech and financial services.
Very vague.
What's that?
They were very vague.
Yeah. They were very vague. I don't know. Allison, any thoughts on what these guys might? I mean, I know we're asking for kind of idle speculation here, but what the heck? It's called the Fintech Hustle.
I can do idle speculation all day. I think it's big because I don't think Walmart knows yet, and I actually think, I mean, that's okay, right? I mean, going kind of, we were talking about the data theme. I mean, retailers have always known the power of customer data, right? You could argue that financial services absent credit unions have sort of lagged in really understanding the importance of that, right? And not just seeing it as a homogenized set. So I think the Walmart piece is interesting. You could kind of lump it in with this insert retail name here, wants to be a bank. We should all be scared about this. I don't actually think they're interested, and Scott and I talked about this in the prep call. I don't think they're interested in banking. I think they're interested in bank data. I think that they are going to look at money movement, not a banking relationship as we sort of kind of know and strive for. So I think it's interesting, but it's one of these, we kind of talk about the pace of the industry. It's nice that we're starting to see this fail fast / fail succeed mentality. Like, you don't necessarily have to know the end game. If you know the ingredients, you will be able to make something really, really interesting from it. And it may work and it may not, but that's one of the interesting things I think about, about the market. But no, I think they're in it for the data. And, they're certainly masters of utilizing that, but I don't think they're wanting to be a bank. I think that they're just wanting bank data. But Scott, I know you've got some insight here.
Yeah, no, this is just so interesting. I mean, it definitely feels like, history is repeating itself with the online banks or the specialized, the specialized, internet-based banks. We saw this 20, 21, 22 years ago. I just was thinking back, Bank One is an old name. They launched Wingspan Bank. Some of you may recall that. Synovus had Point Path Bank. AAA launched a virtual bank. Everbank was one of the first, working with Wilmington Savings Fund Society. And, I think that experiment didn't work out. And I think there were the major issue was cost of acquisition was just too high to make it work. And maybe someone will figure that out this time. Maybe Chime will figure that out. I totally agree with you. Walmart will do something much more nuanced than they attempted to do the last time they looked to get into banking. And I did share this story. I'll tell it here. 20 years ago, they were looking to launch a virtual bank. They were looking for a mortgage platform. I went down the mortgage bot pitch. We were going to do their front end as well as their back end fulfillment. And I did marvel at the fact that they really walked the talk and didn't spend a penny on anything that wasn't absolutely necessary for the business or added value to the customer. And I recall buying a cup of coffee in their lobby, waiting to see their vendor management people, and I actually had to pay 3 cents for the creamer that went into my coffee. So they were quite frugal, and I was really blown away by how true they were to their brand. But they ended up not really proceeding with that initiative. And now 20 years later, a lot of these ideas are resurfacing, and I think this time 2.0 will be more nuanced, and we'll see if someone can find the recipe. It's certainly going to be interesting to see it unfold.
I mean, I think timing.
Go ahead, Allison.
And I think timing is everything, right? I think we automatically assume first mover advantage, but there's advantages and disadvantages. And when you talk about digital or digital only virtual banks, having an online bank where you remove the teller is not the digital bank definition today, right? And so when we kind of talk about the road being littered with these sort of failed digital banks, what I would submit to Scott's point is that was 1.0, and I think we should all be grateful to the folks that led that charge, right? It was a huge unknown at the time, but the cost of acquisition is lower now. There is kind of a call it a second mover advantage, and really learning that it is not just about convenience. It's, digital is the default now. So just taking the teller out doesn't necessarily provide a value. You do need to provide that. The data plays really, really strongly into that, as does the branding. So it will be interesting to see what Walmart does, but we are starting to see these, like Scott said, these sort of second and third forays, which is not a bad thing. It's not, there should be no shame in trying something again with more information, with more knowledge, with more inspiration. We should applaud that, right? And as things open and close, and I know we're probably going to talk about some of those examples, I don't necessarily see that as failure. I just feel like that's just the maturation of what we're doing. I mean, who not every idea works. That doesn't mean you should never never try it. It should spur you to do it better the next time. And that's what I think we're going to start seeing a trend even stronger than the M&A piece, which is that second or third or fourth at bat doing better and better and better. And I think that's probably the most exciting trend that I see coming up here shortly.
Well, maybe Walmart was ahead of their time on the pay for your creamer, because we're all sitting here at home, and while I see that you all have comfy chairs in the background, we do all have to buy our own creamer.
Yes, we do. And our chair. I bought this chair. So NYMBUS, if you're listening, reimburse.
That's right.
There is kind of an analogous set of events on the mortgage side. So if you think about it, there was the same thing, this 1.0 20 years ago, attempts to be national brand and online, and upset disrupt the entire mortgage area. It didn't happen. But now we are seeing national brands be established in kind of the direct to consumer environment. So, this is like people are finding recipes. There's not a lot of success stories, but there's a few success stories in the mortgage world. We all know the Rocket story. We watching the Super Bowl. We also saw Guaranteed Rate, with a national ad. Loan Depot been in the market as well, trying to build national brands. So there are success stories in this kind of second generation of fintech, effort to build more national franchises around, a different delivery model. So certainly expect the same thing to occur in the traditional banking or on the banking side as well.
Huh. What do you think, Ron? What do you think? Anything about Walmart before we move on to something else?
Yeah, I think there's actually two things going on here with Walmart's fintech plans. And to set up the first one, I would say I've been watching this show on Netflix. And in the episode last night, there was this woman who taught her dog to bark every time it heard the word Pellegrini. And if you want to hear Walmart bark, just say interchange, because that's what they jump to. And that's part of their DNA. I was at a conference a number of years ago, had the opportunity to interview Lee Scott, the former CEO of Walmart at the time. He was the chairman of the board. And this was when MCX, the Merchant Customer Exchange Consortium, was starting up. And I asked him, I said, in light of the fact that so many consortia fail, especially in financial services, what makes you think that MCX will succeed? And what he said, I've never forgotten. He said, I don't know that MCX will succeed, and I don't really care if it does, as long as Visa suffers. And there's the clue to how Walmart is going, how they act and react. Why do they want to get into fintech? Because they find ways of they can find ways of avoiding the traditional payments infrastructure and system so that they can avoid, if not eliminate, interchange. That's number one. Number two, and Scott kind of alluded to it, they have been a leader in supply chain integration and innovation for years. And I think that's why they announced a cryptocurrency about a year and a half ago at this point. It's not because they want consumers to use the Walmart coin. They want a cryptocurrency to speed up payments within the supply chain. So I think they've been vague about what they're doing, Scott, because they don't want to tip their hand about the payments avoidance piece. And I think they're going to look to a lot of kind of unsexy, boring stuff, relatively boring stuff, from a fintech supply chain integration perspective, that's really going to address a lot of their costs and speed, speed to market, not speed to market, but the process cycle times within the supply chain. I think that's where Walmart's going with their fintech plans.
Makes sense.
Very interesting. Well, and guys, if it's okay, Ron, if I can call a quick audible here, I saw a question come in from the the and I thought I would just kind of pose it and give you my first throwdown on what I was thinking on this. Question just came in. What do you see emerging in the next 3 years in fintech? And I don't know that I have all the answers to that, but just a few threads that just come out to my mind that I'd love to get our guests' thoughts on this, and yours too, Ron. Is it seems like everybody's been investing in origination or account opening systems, and that's been hot. But I see a very immature lead gen capability in the industry, meaning as they build out the capability to handle volume and to open up new accounts and to sell better, just because you can sell better doesn't mean you have the marketing to drive the top end of the pipeline. And I think that's an area where there's some opportunities. I think another area that jumps out at me is what you were talking about on the interchange marking there, Ron, which was companies that navigate the commerce payments area, where they get into very specific industries, know a specific industry sector, and get into where payments and commerce overlap. Something in that seems really kind of interesting to me. I don't really have any specific examples that I can cite, but something in that area. And I just think niches in general are fascinating to me. I know, Allison, this is an area we talk about this. You're a marketer around this, and not just in fintech, but in banking. This idea of how can a bank choose a community definition that is not a zip code, but is a group of very specific people. I think that's hot, and I don't even necessarily know why, but I'm intrigued by it. I don't know.
No, it's a fun subject, right? To talk about. I mean, we believe that niche is the new local, right? It's sort of that replacement, if you would, for the zip code. So, going back to the question, which I think is a good one over the next 3 years, I think that banks and credit unions that lean into the fact that their charter is probably the most valuable thing that they have, realizing that, utilizing that, I think is gonna kind of separate the pack in the next 3 years. And clear bias. I have a clear bias, but I do believe, and Ron's probably going to jump in on this, that brand and marketing is sort of the next frontier for banking. I mean, there's only so many ways to check your balance, right? There's only so many products that can do that for you. But the way that it's positioned and who it's positioned to, Sam, to your point about niches I think is huge. And marketing is not a fluffy thing, right? It is the value proposition. But I think that when we think about mergers and acquisitions, we think about some of the trends we've talked about, and in our hearts, we feel like it should have worked out better than it did. I think the fact that there's not that the sales motion, there's not the MarTech and the sales stack to support it inside the bank or the credit union. There's not the people to do it, and products don't sell themselves. So I think that's probably kind of number two.
And it's not always just the technology either.
No, it's not. I mean, it's how you feel about it.
But there's more to it than I deployed Adobe and I'm going with God. I mean, there's a lot more to it that people. You kicked this off talking about people, right? And there's a people element to that that's a big deal.
Absolutely. We tend to talk about kind of the move to digital, and obviously that is happening, and people aren't going to branches, but branch workers aren't the only people in a bank, right? We tend to think about all the people have disappeared. Well, no, that they're not going into the branches, but there are people that are tasked to sell the products of the bank or the credit union, and that is an area that has not matured at the pace that the technology has. And so that's when you're you can get ahead of your skis in the sales cycle when you don't have the product, but I don't know what the reverse of being ahead of your skis are. But if your product is here and I don't know what it is, and your sales motion is here, there's a gap, right? And that's a gap that's got to be covered for sure.
I think you're behind your skis is technically off your skis. You're
off your skis. Yeah.
You're in the lodge knocking back a bourbon or something. But Scott, what do you? I think so too. Scott, what do you think? What's going to be emerging? Any wildcat prediction?
Well, so it's a super interesting area. There have been a number of firms. So you mentioned Total Expert, but there's just a whole bunch of firms that are doing work in mortgage tech around customer relationship management, customer retention, customer outreach. So, top of mind, Total Expert, Mortgage Coach, Jungo, Boomerang. I mean, there's a long list of these firms. They're all relatively small in scale. But that work, that groundwork, that foundational work's been being done over the last 5 years. But the business, the industry has in such a boom period that literally their companies can't keep up with the business that they have. So I think we're going to enter a different cycle now, right? Rates are going to stabilize. Maybe they'll tick up. And I think that all these investments these firms have made in customer retention and customer satisfaction, customer relationship management, building, those investments are going to pay off. Firms are going to want to put much more energy into maintaining those relationships. And in the mortgage world, it's a lot about data and being really quick to market when there's a refi opportunity, for example. And I think most lenders would say they're not nearly as good at that as they want to be. And they'll need to be better at it. They'll need to be much more analytical, much data-driven. So I think it's going to be a very exciting, say in the next 5 years, there's a lot of these customer relationship management, retention capabilities get deployed deeply into these organizations. It's going to not only mean putting the tech in, but then you put the organization in around the tech to kind of make it live and real and living and part of the company. So I think you hit on the right area for kind of the innovations there. Now it's got to be implemented deeply and thoroughly in the mortgage industry, and that's going to happen.
That's great, Ron. What do you think?
If you look back over the past 3, 5, 6 years or so of fintech, I think a lot of what has emerged has been very front end oriented, very user interface, user experience oriented, and I think we're moving into a next phase of the fintech development, which is much less sexy, much less consumer or user focused, and much more about the infrastructure. And I think maybe that's what Scott's alluding to when he talks deeper. But it's not just deeper within the banks and credit unions; it's deeper within even from the fintech provider, or the technology provider perspective. We've already seen bank as a service, but it feels very surface almost. I mean, there's so much more room to go in terms of lending as a service, card issuing as a service, brokerage or other financial infrastructure. I think we're kind of moving from bank as a service to fintech as a service, and I think where the ability to kind of develop and manage and utilize APIs becomes a real critical capability from both a financial institution perspective as well as from a technology provider perspective. And doing so not just to enable the financial institutions, but to enable better connection and interconnectivity between partners. That's why I think, to maybe a certain extent, a lot of the merger and acquisition stuff could be, what might have been a way of going about creating an integration by just acquiring somebody. Now you don't have to do that anymore. There's better ways to kind of integrate. So I think that's one area that's more of an infrastructure. And I also think that it's about going back to this notion of the supply chain, is really kind of attacking some of the supply chain inefficiencies. I think there's a lot of opportunity from a small business perspective. You look at what a Shopify is doing, what Stripe is doing in partnership with Shopify, coming out with its, almost bank as a service capabilities. I think we're, just at the tip of that iceberg. And look at what companies like Move and Unit and Synctera, Treasury Prime are doing. And I think that's kind of what we're going to see much more so in the next 3 to 5 years.
If I can pile on there, Ron, just on your infrastructure point, I think you're totally spot on. And the driver there is for, at least in the mortgage sector, for the first time in 25 years, we actually have the ability to connect with, vendors can connect with one another via API in a very streamlined, scalable way. There's been a lot of talk about system to system integration for years. And I remember the old days of EDI. And we have these APIs that, are more and more central to what we're doing. And that allows, like if I kind of pick on my own Optimal Blue, which is an engine. You no longer need to go and use the UI of that engine to get information out. You can have any system talk to that engine via API, and we are seeing that trend really catch fire. And hundreds of our clients are now taking advantage of that system to system integration. So I think that is that infrastructure as a service. And from our perspective, the key was that we decided we didn't care how someone got at the engine, whether it was through API or through the UI. We were agnostic in terms of how they accessed it. So I think it's a great point that infrastructure as a service is clearly going to be something we'll see more of.
Allison, you must have some thoughts on this coming from NYMBUS now.
Yeah, I do have a couple thoughts. The point you made, Ron, I think is interesting because, you usually have this sort of classic, build or buy kind of mentality. And I think what you brought up is interesting, which is it could be, build, buy, or integrate. And the thought of integration as opposed to acquisition solves a lot of the pieces we talked about earlier when you acquire, right, where you've got the cultural piece, the process piece, you're one of 15 other new things on the shelf piece. So I think leaning into integration as not just a technical option, but also as a business model, even brand option, I think is super interesting because I think that the open banking and the API economy, all of that's been kind of well discussed and it's there. But kind of going back to what Sam said is like, so how do you activate that? How do you turn that into, a sales advantage or an advantage for your bank, your credit union, or your fintech, right? Just saying you have it or just doing it takes care of the technology part, but it doesn't actually move you forward, right? Until it's integrated into the overall business strategy, right? It's a tick box if you just see it as a technology piece. It enables, I think, you to talk about a broader integration story and hopefully or potentially save yourself from some of the churn that happens with acquisitions, right? No one really churned when you integrate, when you do integration. There's no churn, there's no one's crying, that kind of thing. So it can be a lot, it can be an easier path of least resistance, but I would just say just doing the connection is similar to just acquiring the company. If you leave it at that, the result will be no different than what you have today.
Yeah, I just real quickly, I'll just point out that one of the questions, more of a comment, was saying that banks and credit unions are declaring progress with MarTech way too early.
Yeah.
The point that you just made there, and I wanted to point that out from the audience. But
yeah, agreed.
Yeah. So, Ron, what do you think? You want to move into another topic and keep it moving? I see some things coming in, and we had some other things on the agenda. What do you think?
Absolutely. Question is, do you want to get to challenger banks, or you want to get to what's working, not working in the industry? We got time for one more topic.
Let's start. You know what? Let's mix it up here. I'll call an audible. Let's talk first about if we have some time, we'll come back to challenger banks. What are you guys seeing working and not working in the business right now? Just let's go there. Whoever wants to go first. Scott, you have any thoughts on that? What's working?
So you remember last March when the pandemic hit, and those of us that were in the real estate related world I think the concern was that the home market, the home buying market, residential real estate market was literally going to just shut down. And of course, the exact opposite happened. So what's working, the home market, the home buying market, the home financing market, not only is it working, but we financed $4 trillion of transactions last year. So that's working. The mortgage market, the home market, it's unbelievable how well it's working. And we had to, of course, handle things completely differently than we ever had before. So that's working. I'm gonna rake that as my number one item. Allison?
Yeah, I think there's a lot working. And I think it's good that I get to go before Ron, because I think there's a lot more working than not. Kind of a macrocosm of what Scott said. What's working is the pace, right? I think the pace is working. I don't think we should be wringing our hands about the pace of M&A and the pace of this and that. Like, we need this pace. We are making up for lost time and we're charting a different future. So we need this pace. So I think that that's working well. And like I said, I'm starting to see the fail or succeed, just something fast mentality take hold even outside of the technology. And so I think that that's working extremely, extremely well.
All right. So let's go to the others. Well, Ron, what do you think? Do you want to focus on what's working, Ron, or do you want to save your powder for what's not working?
Now let's go to the other side. And,
wait, before you do, can I throw out one more?
Yeah.
This is just a little thing, but little things sometimes add up. I mean, maybe it's just my personal experience, but single sign-on is finally working. Just in terms of, my own, daily life with all the different portals and systems that I have to use, and just being able to go sign on to everything one time. And I know this is not, I don't know how widespread it is, but I feel, and of course it's, it's the big tech players that enabled this, like Microsoft, but that's a huge time saver when you get it to working. I know it's just a little, is single sign-on working for you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think single sign-on and there are lots of little things, to your point. I don't know if that's just, that we're all working from home and noticing it more, but there are so many little efficiencies in the process, right? We talked about supply chain process. I think there's improvements just in the overall workflow. Single sign-on is one, and there's a couple others I can think of. But yeah, I mean, little time savers like that. I think, yeah, you got to take the wins, big and small.
That's up. All right. Well, thank you. Just had to throw that out there.
So, Sam, before you move on to the what's not working, I will throw out one comment about what's working. And it's not a specific point, but something more general. I think there's a overstatement on the part of a lot of fintechs that come into the market, like the direct-to-consumer fintech startups, who like to position everything they do as the world of financial services and banking is broken, and we're going to come in and fix it. And reality is that's not the case. We've seen so many challenger banks like Monzo and N26 try to come into the U.S. When I've interviewed them, they're asking, well, what's wrong? What's good? Why you see U.S. as this market? Well, the traditional banking, mobile banking is so broken and it's a terrible user experience. And reality is it isn't terrible, and there's fairly high satisfaction. J.D. Power, I think a couple of years ago, actually showed that the big banks had now higher satisfaction than the mid-sized banks and credit unions, and that's not a knock on the mid-sized and credit unions. It just shows that there's you can come back from being the big bad evil providers. So this, I think we're overplaying, or some of the fintech entrepreneurs are overplaying the broken aspect. Where for the most part, from the consumer perspective, things are actually not so bad.
I would agree. I think in some cases they're solutions looking for problems as opposed to actually addressing it. And it's not saying it's perfect, but I would agree. And progress can only be made and sustained if you acknowledge the progress that you're making. And I think there's a lot of great momentum out there right now. And I would agree. I think some of this is some of it's self-imposed, because I think we're all really hard on ourselves and we're wanting to do the right thing and get to perfect. But there's a lot of progress, before you get to perfection. So I would agree.
So
Yeah,
Sam, we've
something else.
just got a few more minutes. And so we really need to go to the what's not working, because if I start that off, we'll be here for another hour and a half. So we should
I have
look at
one.
Allison.
I just have one. Yeah, just one thing, and then we'll let Ron can take the next. Here's one thing, and I've always had a problem with this: is the risk model in fintech, right? So we beat up the banks and credit unions for not being innovative, but at the same time, we expect them to carry the entire financial and brand risk anytime they want to do something. And that's just, as an outsider coming in, that's always struck me as strange for a bank or a credit union to accept that kind of risk. And so to me, it's no wonder that in some cases, feet get dragged, because I just think that is a strange model that just doesn't work. It doesn't work for anyone. It doesn't have the vendors not accountable. It's just a strange model. So that's my one thing that's not working.
So I'll toss one out, and it's more kind of mortgage industry specific, but if you are runners, if you're running and you have a tailwind, and that tailwind just, goes on and on and on and on, you start to think maybe you're a little, at first you realize it's a tailwind. And then at some point you just think, well, I'm a better runner. I really am. And I think what the market has been strong for so long that I think it could breed confidence. And I think that's probably the same thing happening in the stock market and in Dogecoin and other items. There's a risk here that the memory fades and people to interpret the amazing business as being less a function of wonderful environment and trends and low rate environment, more a function of skill and strategy. And there's undoubtedly both, but I do think we run the risk of being overconfident as an industry, and people are, I think, well advised to try and keep that in check best they can.
Yeah, I would say one area that I don't think is working well from all of our client engagements. We talk to banks and credit unions out there, but also I would also just say industry providers in fintech as well. And that is when you get beyond the tried and true use cases of data, fraud detection, credit decisions, maybe reduce some costs. What I find is that most people are interested in using data to grow the bank or to grow the fintech. And yet, I think more often than not, whenever we ask for use cases or what are you trying to, give me 3 examples of how you're trying to grow the bank using data, it's hamana. It's either there's nothing there or it's not specific enough. I would just suggest that anybody that's either using data to solve a problem around growth, meaning basically we're talking back to the MarTech example, Allison. Mm-hmm. This is a little bit MarTech, but it doesn't have to only be MarTech, right? But the point is that using data to grow the bank. What are 3 examples what are 3 problems your bank is trying to solve? Then we'll go talk about technology and what we throw at it. But what are the 3 problems? Just articulating those crisply for anyone, board of directors, employees, good to have a vested team that's really motivated and very crystal clear, right? I think it's interesting about something like an Optimal Blue is it was very specific around pricing, right? Whenever you're very specific in what you're doing, I think it's easier to do that. But I think if you're kind of broader, it just gets a little bit more nebulous. And I find that people are kind of struggling with that a little bit. So that's my take on some things that aren't working.
Hey, so Sam, we're about 4 minutes at the top of the hour, and I want to make sure that we keep to this and let everybody go to the meetings or wherever they got at the top of the hour. So I will skip sharing mine, what's not working. I just say I think I agree with Allison on hers. I do want to make just a quick announcement that for the next Fintech Hustle, we are going to rename it to Hamana. Is going to be the new name of the podcast. Sam, on behalf of Sam and the rest of Cornerstone, Allison Netzer, Scott Happ, I want to thank both of you for taking some time out of your day to join us and share your thoughts and opinions on what's going on. in the world of fintech and the Fintech Hustle. And everybody, thanks a lot for joining. We look forward to seeing you at the next episode of the Fintech Hustle. Thanks a lot. Bye now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.